This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here with a wonderful guest coming all the way from Europe, and I have Rudi Ghequire. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Good to know.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us all the way from Rodenbach Brewery, how are you today?
Very fine. I was coming to Nashville for the World Beer Cup, so I was there 3 days judge for judging the international World Beer Cup. It's very nice. Tasted a lot of beers. I had a lot of sessions, and I'm coming since 2006 to the World Beer Cup.
Right.
First time I was here in Seattle, 2006.
Now you are a bit of a pro when it comes to the art of beer making. I believe you started at Rodenbach when I was 9 years old in 1981. Would that be true?
No, 82.
82, all right.
The 1st of April of 82.
April Fool's Day, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would be 10, okay.
Yeah, okay.
I think I read somewhere it was 1981, so okay.
Yeah.
And what was your original role when you started with the brewery?
Yeah, I was purchaser.
Okay.
I was purchaser of the raw materials. I'm an engineer, food engineer, and then I became brew engineer by studying as free student at the University of Leuven. But I started my career at Rodenbach as in the purchasing raw materials, packaging, all these things. Became a director of the brewery, and then in '94 I became the production director beside my purchasing.
So the brewery have been established for quite some time. I believe they were in the same family since 1821.
Yes, but the brewery existed quite longer.
Yes, yeah.
I have discovered that there was a takeover in 1726. So there is one thing, that is the name of the brewery, that calls the Rodenbach Brewery, due to a German family who took over the brewery in 1821. But there was an existing style of mixed fermentation that goes back to the early Middle Ages.
Now, when you say mixed fermentation, for those of our viewership who are not familiar with your beers, could you explain a little bit behind that process?
Yes, okay. The origin of beer making was spontaneous fermentation.
Yes.
But the problem with spontaneous fermentation is that you only can make that in winter time, when the night temperature is low enough to avoid lactic bacteria infection.
Yes, yeah.
That's the reason. But people needed at that time the whole year-round beer. So what did they do in summer? They took the strain of a winter lambic and they made a summer beer with it. But the shelf of a summer beer was very short. To preserve the beer and to give it a longer shelf life, they blended a part of old matured beer, part of sour beer, with the young fermented beer to reduce the pH back to 3.5. And that's the pH of a good white wine, of a Chardonnay wine. So the beer was preserved by acidity. But once you have acidity in your product, you may not have any bitterness. So this type of beers are made without or with as less hops as possible.
Now, these low pHs are integral to the tastiness of these beers.
Well,
yeah?
Low pH, this is the pH of a wine. The pH of a cider is even lower. The pH of fruit juice is even lower. So this is acceptable. 3.5 is an acceptable pH for a human being.
And how many other breweries make beers in the same style as Rodenbach?
Well, this is what has happened during the First World War. This style of beer, mixed fermentation, was very popular in the Flanders. But during the First World War, the Germans picked all the copper from the breweries and they made weapons with it.
Yes, yeah.
Rodenbach was the only brewery who had to pay for it, and they could keep their brew house and their vats in the brewery. That is the reason why our brewery could start it immediately again after the First World War.
I see.
With this style, and so this style had survived whole history.
And how have you found this style to be accepted since you joined the brewery all over the world?
Okay, we were an export, but the Belgian market is not growing, so we have more capacity than we need for the Belgian market, so we have to look for other markets, and this is what happens. That is the reason also why we are here.
And how have the Canadians been accepting this style of beer?
I'm sure they will accept that because the origin of the Canadians mostly is also coming from Europe, and in Europe, depending on the place where you are born, a lot of people accept this style of beer. You have to know that people from the south of Europe can accept more sourness comparing people from the north. And this is also important to know. Here you have typical French county or French province, and that will say an origin of that type of people will accept more sourness.
Sour beers are very zeitgeisty right now, most certainly amongst a certain contingent of the beer drinking populace. What are your thoughts on the sour beers that are being made worldwide right now, the ones that you've tasted?
Yeah, okay, let me be honest. Now a lot of sour beers are made, but also a lot of kettle sour beers. And kettle sour beers are typical lactic fermented beers with a lot of sourness, only in the taste and not in the nose. So most of those beers have less balance, and therefore they use some fruit in the beers to bring more volatile flavors in the beer, to aware people that there is some sourness inside.
Now, we haven't even touched upon the fermentation vessels that you use at your brewery.
Yeah, that's right. We have standing up vats, and this is different when you compare it with the lambic beers. But in lambic beers, they do the primary fermentation and the maturation on the same vat. That is the reason why they work with laying vats, because a laying vat you can top it up. A standing up vat you cannot top that up. But we go with fermented beer on the wooden vats. We do only an aging or a maturation for making a typical sour beer that is originally made for blending with young beer.
And these are quite large vats. When we speak of it, it's not like a barrique or anything like that. These are large.
And this is also the origin of aging liquid on wood, because in the past, also in wine, they use huge vats to mature their wines. And this is more sustainable than using small vats, because in a small vat you cannot go inside. You cannot clean it at the inner side, and that's the reason why they only can use it for quite a short time.
What do you believe these oak foederen bring to the beers from your brewery?
Okay. Typical for our foeders is that we have a wild yeast culture at the inner side of the vats. It's a kind of, the yeast cells are in the wood, and they will coming out of the wood to mature the beer completely. This is a kind, it's a maturation process. And the wild yeast that we have in our vats, the cultures that we have in our vats, will also ferment the higher sugars that normally will not be fermented by the classical yeast, brewer's yeast.
So you're obviously not cleaning the vats that well if the yeast is still in the walls.
Okay, if the beer is ready to use, then we clean the vat only with fresh water. That's all.
I see. Right.
We don't take away the culture who is inside. And we fill it immediately with young beer, so that the yeast cells are coming from the wood, who will ferment the beer again.
A question for you: with the beers being aged in this manner, what kind of longevity do they have in the bottle?
Well, there is a difference between the shelf life that the beer can have and the date that we the best before and that we put on the bottle, because this is shorter than the beer can have. What will happen is the beer will change. You will have other flavors in the beer, and some people like that. You become Porto flavors and Madeira flavors in our beer. But in Belgium you have to put a lot number on it, and they have chosen to put a shelf life that is shorter than the beer can have.
Right. That's EU regulations there?
Also commercial regulations,
right.
To have a quicker rotation, and
that makes
sense,
is
the time that we guarantee the same flavor as on the date of bottling.
Have you tasted any really old beers from your brewery from before your time?
Yes.
Ah.
Not from before my time, but I have beers in the brewery from '67 and still drinkable.
So do you have many beers that have been sitting in these foederen for a longer period of time, an extended period of time?
Yeah, we have one for pleasure, who is more than 10 years old, and this is nice to have.
Good Lord, what kind of evolution does it happens when you leave it for that extended period in foederen?
Depending of the size of vat. The bigger the vat is, the longer you can keep the liquid and the beer inside. The whole evolution also in wine aging is that they are going into small vats. But the origin of wine aging was was keeping them in big fats, and that is the reason why also Crianza wines had existed, and also Reserva wines. Normally this is 2 years matured on wood.
Well, Rudi, we're looking forward to tasting your wine, your wines, your beers after this.
Yeah, it is a missing link between both.
I think some people don't make that connection, but they should.
Yeah, I'm sure. Let me describe our beer. It has the refreshing of beer with the complexity of wine.
All right. Thank you very much, Rudi. We'll speak with you very, very
Thanks.
soon.